What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot with your hosts, Robby the Wagner and Charles William Carpenter II, with another Robby Russell. What's going on, Robby?
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being on. I was just skipping right over where I called Charles II, not giving him a chance to respond.
Quick question: is Charles? Are you actually the third?
I am.
I'm the third as well. So we have both have connections there.
Yes.
There will not be a fourth.
Same with me.
That seems to be a theme.
Yeah, I did make people. I chose not to do a fourth. I was like, this is where it ends.
I vividly remember having a family dinner with my grandfather and my dad there. It was like several of my relatives when I was maybe 13 or so. And I remember, I think there was a question, something came up like, oh, will you name your kid the fourth? And I was like, no, I will not. And there was like a slight look of disappointment. But then I also just decided not to make kids or not to make people. So I got out of that regardless. So I'm a much better uncle anyways, but no, the lineage of our royalty has ended with me.
Yeah. The line and blood ends here.
I don't think our genes were that great anyways. All right.
Whoa. Maybe you should be a host on the show. Your self-deprecating humor is right on par. This is going to go fine. So there's two Robbys and two Trays is what I was going to say.
Robby, you should have at least a few sentences about who you are before we totally skip over letting you introduce yourself.
Who am I? That's a good question. I am Robby Russell. I am a software engineer. I've been running a software agency, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I've been doing that since 2002, so that's like 22 years or so, and primarily work in Ruby on Rails. And I created an open source project called Oh My Zsh nearly 15 years ago, which is where some people know me from. And blogger and podcast host of the Maintainable Software Podcast.
Cool.
Very nice.
All right, now you can intro the whiskey.
I may? Oh, thank you.
Yes, you may. I give you permission.
Yeah. Thank you, young man. Okay, so today we're having the Mortlach. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but it's a Mortlach Single Malt Whisky, Scotch whiskey, the wee Witchie is what it is. It's aged 12 years. We know it's single malt, so we know the mash bill. It is aged in sherry and bourbon casks, and it is 86.8 proof. The wee Witchie. You might say that a bunch. I'm sorry. The wee Witchie.
I had not heard of this one before.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, this was a purchase solely on the branding because it looked very cool. I like their fonts and logo and stuff. So,
looks like a fancy co-working space or something called Mortlach.
I'd work there.
How do you pronounce it? Imported from Norwalk, Connecticut, but Dufftown, Scotland. I don't know where that is in the maybe I'll pull up a map later.
It's the Beast of Dufftown too, and that is also very compelling. On the top near the cork, it says the Beast of Dufftown.
An ode to the still that bears the Beast of Dufftown. I guess that's what they called the still.
An ode to the still.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It must be not be working still anymore. I don't know.
Ooh, it's got kind of a sweet smell. The sherry casks and bourbon probably would do that.
Yeah.
Like it almost like a little bit of a...
How about some dried apricot?
No. Raspberries. Dried raspberries.
No, I was actually thinking raisins. Raisins, kind of.
I was thinking moist currants.
Okay. I almost
not dried.
No, moist, yeah.
Moist.
I almost said cherries, actually, yeah. So that was vacillating there. All right, let's find out. You might have influenced me a little bit, but I get kind of like a sour cherry. So, a very moist sour cherry. Get a little of that. A little mousiness to it.
How would you describe mousiness?
Mossiness.
Mossiness, not
Massimo? Massimo?
Massimo?
That's what my son...
Like the Target clothes?
Massimo? No, Massimo is what my son used to call marshmallows before he could say words good. Mossiness would be... It has kind of like a leafy earthiness to it and almost like... almost like a little bit of not dewy, but like
Tastes like you went outside in the morning and just licked your lawn.
Yeah, maybe
A little bit.
Yeah,
And like someone had maybe dropped it or put out their cigarette in the grass. There's some tobacco-y vibes in there.
interesting.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and then you licked it. Mine would have a lot of dirt. I do have grass, but there's a decent amount of dirt.
Like a smoky or charred, burnt toffee. Just like a little too cooked.
Maybe charred moss for me. This is where I'm going with it. I get a little of the toffee though after the sour kind of fades, and a little toffee, and then it gets into this like something kind of mildewy almost. It sounds delicious.
You're really
right?
selling this one.
Yeah, well, this is the Beast of Dufftown. It's not for the lighthearted. Okay, no. It might be a wee witchy. Could be a bit.
Is it too late for me to
witchy?
change my handle to the Beast of Dufftown? Sounds pretty cool.
You're the beast of the Beast of Flufftown.
The third.
Beastie the third. The wee witchy the third. That's what I would get. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. I like it.
Robert Wagner, would you feel prepared to give this a rating? So, Robbie, I will tell you and our other listener, just a little reminder on our rating system, 0 to 8 tentacles, because we are pseudo-engineers, so of course we have to include the 0. 4 being like middle of the road for you, not bad. 8 being amazing, give me nothing else, basically.
Yeah. For me, it's going to be, I'm going to say a 5 because it's a little better than middle of the road. I think I've had a lot worse scotches for sure. Yeah. I don't know. Nothing like, it's kind of middle of the road, but it's like not in a bad way. So it's like, I'm giving it that 1 extra point.
Yeah. Interesting. Robby Russell?
Yeah, I'm gonna second that. I feel like it's 5. It's a solid 5. It feels, it's something I can drink, and I wouldn't like turn it down if someone was offering it to me. Would I buy another bottle? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm going to go 4.5. I was leaning more for, I mean,
we can use halves? Oh. Okay.
Yeah, we can do whatever we want. There's no
5.2.
All right, perfect.
All right.
There you go. A little above. You have to get the closest without going over. So, yeah, for me, it's like easy to drink. It's pretty smooth. Has some interesting flavors, but it fades away really quickly. It's like quick to forget. Doesn't have much burn.
No, that's true.
Yeah, and so, it's a little too wee. I would like more wee in my witchy, is what I think.
Wee.
Wee. Ah, wee. Not Scotch at all in that way, or not a Scotch, Scottish accent.
My suspicion is that my wife will use this in experimenting with some cocktails.
Ooh.
So we'll see how that.
Yeah.
I'll report back on that. That was her pandemic hobby that she picked up over the last several years. She's amazing at making cocktails now, which is wonderful.
That's a nice skill to have in the house. I was gonna say, other than the rusty nail, I can't say I've really had many like Scotch-based cocktails. I think this could be interesting for that, though.
You know what else is interesting? TypeScript.
Is it though?
Depending on who you ask.
You know what's interesting about it is like this sticker is interesting.
Oh, I do love that sticker.
Yeah, that's a pretty good sticker.
Yeah. Shout out
DevTools.
fuck, I forget his name. I know it's Hipster Smoothie.
Andrew.
What's his actual name? Oh, sorry, Andrew.
Anyway, you were going to say something about TypeScript before I interrupted.
I was just trying to lead into the hot takes.
Yes. So that's our big hot takes section. Go for it.
Yeah, I don't know how much like TypeScript and CSS and stuff you're doing when you're doing Rails. Like, are you building full stack apps or doing more like API work, or like do these questions apply or not? I don't know.
That's an excellent question, Robbie the Wagner. Personally, I have not written more than maybe 20 lines of TypeScript as of yet myself. Most of my work tends to be more on the back end side when I'm helping deal with legacy apps and helping teams get things upgraded and stuff like that. So on the coding side, I don't often get to play with a lot of the fancy new stuff. And when it comes to, and maybe this is part of when a consequence of coming up in an era where we needed to have people that were more focused on the front end to think about all the browser testing and dealing with all that stuff at the time, that I would just leave that work to other people on the team that enjoyed making things work in IE 6 and 7, or at least begrudgingly make that work across the different devices and make things work when things got responsive, or when we were building mobile specific app or versions of our web apps that we would build for our clients. So I always just kind of like pushed the front end over to the other people on the team that were that just seemed to have more of a knack for thinking about all the different contexts you needed to think about there. The people I always enjoyed walking around in the office and seeing the people that would be like sliding their browsers with back and forth on their screen to see how things were, like when the responsive error happened. And so that was someone else's responsibility. So that's what they were dealing with that when it came to more of that. But I did do some JavaScript stuff, but a lot of that was pre things like React and stuff coming out. And I think the last frameworks that I worked with was when maybe Ember first came out. It was kind of a new thing. I did some work with that, and we did some projects with Angular and React. And prior to that, doing a lot of stuff with like Backbone and Prototype, just raw JavaScript stuff as well. So, but I was always more of a back-end performance fine-tuning on the application side person.
That's fair.
Well, luckily Ember's dead, so you don't have to do that anymore. And then
we just inherited a project that is running on Ember, which has been a while since we've had many companies contact us for that. So it's only 2 weeks ago that started for us. But remembering what that world was like, and it's not dead.
No, it's not. I jest because Robby is still deeply involved, even currently. And so I like to razz him a little bit. See, I didn't know if you also were like taking the ideologies of DHH more recently, of like ripping TypeScript out and moving to not compiling front end files and no transpile, no compile, like serve your files as is, and utilize more modern web technologies versus falling back on these frameworks and build tool sets and all of that. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that side of things. I
think I know, like with the controversy around them ripping out TypeScript of that one particular project. I don't know. I feel like I didn't really understand why there's such a big backlash against that, if that's just like a project that they decided to do that one particular thing. As far as like what our team's typically doing, we are tending to work slightly on slightly older apps, and so we're always kind of stuck a little bit like 5 to 8 years behind and trying to figure out how we're going to iterate our way forward and help those apps get updated to get to use new things. So one of the things we are working on quite a bit is doing a little bit more of like helping clients navigate the process of like adapting from, say, something like React and wanting to take advantage of things like Hotwire in their apps. And so there's some other people on my team that are more focused on that side of things, that they have a better understanding of that. And coincidentally, my company also does every other year we do a survey of the Ruby on Rails community to get a sense of where people are using all the different tools. And so there's a lot of curiosity around like, are people potentially looking to migrate? What JavaScript package managers are they using now, and like what other JavaScript frameworks are they using with their apps? So I'll have more answers on like what the general Rails community does, and we usually get close to 3,000 people that participate in that survey every couple of years, and we've been doing that since 2009, and it's been interesting just to see how the ecosystem's kind of evolved over the time. But my company tends to be a little bit further behind, only because we're the company that says we're not as interested in building a new shiny new app. I see myself as more of a mender than a maker. I like to help improve things and iterate through things and try to help companies avoid needing to go down the ill-advised big rewrite if possible. Because everybody's like, wouldn't it be just great if we could just start over? Well, if you don't figure out how you're going to keep things updated, and technology keeps changing, and that's just, we do make our lives complicated sometimes as a type of the software industry.
I think that's an excellent point around where like you're just trading some problems, this set of problems for a different set of problems.
Yeah, you end up rewriting over and over again.
And your organization isn't good at updating their software over time, then that's always going to be the case. So
we we have a lot of companies that'll contact us because they want us to help them just with the upgrade. And the first thing I tell them is, I think that's a really bad idea. You need to figure out how to get your own team to prioritize and navigate this stuff. It's a skill set you need to work on and iterate on that. And we can come in and we'll take your money and help you do it, but you're not really going to be reinforcing this as part of your process. And so I see companies will we'll just hire an extra senior person to come in and we'll just kind of like push them off and work on the upgrade. And they have their Git branch that they work on for a couple months, and then they get pulled into the rest of the team's projects and it gets deprioritized and you don't remember where you left off. And it's like the same story over and over and over. And they're like, where was I? Sure. And then you try to bring other people in and you can't track your progress on those projects very well because it's a lot of like digging into rabbit holes. Regardless, I think this isn't a Ruby on Rails specific. This is just a problem with anything. Yeah. And then everybody's like, well, I don't have enough test coverage to rely on. You feel safe that everything's going to work. And like, it's the same stories over and over and over. So that's where we kind of come in and like help teams try to like navigate that, help them also with when people are about to go down rabbit holes, help them figure out, like, put that idea down for a moment, like document it. What were you originally working on, and like help steer them in the right, maybe a different direction, or like not just keep chasing things because you forget where you're at. And then one of the problems that breaks down a lot of organizations is that, say, I'm air quoting, the product people lose confidence in their team's ability to estimate how long these things are going to take to do, because they will give them an estimate and then they go off on rabbit, like, well, there's all these things that popped up along the way. And then if you ever been in one of those conversations with a developer and they're just rattling off all the reasons and all the problems, that a product person is like, I don't need to know all the details. Like, how much time do you think you're going to need? And like, how much longer do you need on this? And then eventually that erodes trust. And so people stop saying, yeah, let's invest time there. We'll come back to it someday when you can get better estimates or you can get more focus. And then developers will also then stop asking for time to do that because they've heard not right now a few too many times. And then it just becomes like a weird situation to work out. So trying to come in and help teams kind of navigate that is what I've been working on to be like what as a super strength, I suppose, or a superhero type thing. But I'm not here to save the day. I'm here to help teams figure this shit out for themselves. So.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too, because it's like, like you said, if you don't teach them how to do it later, they're just going to have more problems. And like teams never prioritize this. It's a problem at like 80% of places I've worked where it's just like, just do features, just do features, just do features. Like, we'll eventually hire someone else to update all this stuff because we need you to just do features all the time. And it's like, why? Yeah. Like, we should care. Like, that is a built-in feature, is upgrading, because it's going to be faster and more performant and like more secure usually. Like, there's a lot of security vulnerabilities that happen when you're stuck on an 8 years old thing, and then you're just like, oh shit, what do I do now? And like, yeah, it's a hard problem.
Estimation is bullshit too, especially to the level that most teams try to estimate to, because you get these project level things, and even if you break that down a little bit, and they're like, I don't know, tell me small, medium, large, and then they still try and internally translate that.
If it's
large
more
is
than
like 6
like
weeks,
a week, it's too big. Like, if you can't confidently say, like, you should ship little tiny pieces, and then you'd be like, this is done, this is done, this is done, instead of like, I'm going to build this for 4 months. Like, making smaller commitments is the only way that you can have confidence. I can confidently estimate things that are like 2 days or less, probably. Changing that button color probably
took me 20
5
years,
seconds.
Until you get in there and realize that it's attached to some dependency that you don't control.
That's true.
That
Bootstrap sets that button color.
Some other ridiculous thing. So anyway, I'm going to regress now back to hot takes before we just talk about serious things. And this is an important one. I think you may have a opinion on get rebase or get merge.
Ooh, that's a good one. I am on team get merge.
I'm a little surprised, I'm going to say, given your tenure in the space. And
it has been easier for me to work my way out of weird, tricky things, and to also work with, say, pair with other people and help them kind of wrap their head around it. So I think it's just more of like, hey, can we set this stuff aside and merge, like navigate it that way? And maybe the secret is out is like, even though I might be have been around the Git world for such a long time that there's a lot about Git that I don't really wrap my head around enough. And then I'm just like, I think maybe also because of the types of projects that I end up working on, I'm usually not needing to sync up that much stuff. I say that with some degree of there, but I tend to lean more on Git merge than Git rebase.
Yeah, I think if you're working on a branch with anyone else, that's probably the better choice. Because I've gotten screwed over a ton about like rebasing, or they rebase and you like forget to like reset before you start working, and then you go to like pull and there's like changes because they've all changed and all the hashes are different, and like you go, I don't know, like I usually end up then just throwing all of the like I keep my changes, but I throw all the history away and just like copy everything over and be like, there you go. Like, so
let's just pretend this never happened.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's a lukewarm take, I suppose. For me.
I think given running an agency, I mean, that's a smart position, I think, to take. What is the most inclusive?
Yeah, that's true. Sidebar on the left or right of VS Code?
Left. For my folders and stuff like that, yeah, it's on the left.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
What's on the right? I think sometimes I have the the zoomed out version or a view where you can kind of, if you're a really, really long file, just to kind of get a sense of where you're at, but I don't use the right too often for anything. What about you two?
Yeah, left is the default, and I'm lazy.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I don't think I've ever really thought about it that much.
Yeah. This was a weird thing on Twitter where like there were like a couple people who were like, I put it on the right, and it's like, what? Why? And it, like the only argument I've heard is like, because they open and close it a lot, and like then their code doesn't jump around because their code is always just aligned to the left. And I'm like, well, who cares? Like, it's just like, yeah, it moves for a second, but you're probably not opening and closing it every like 5 seconds. So it's like,
that's interesting.
Fine.
I rely. I mean, and maybe this kind of speaks to even like Oh My Zsh shell, but like I'm a lazy developer in the sense that I do rely a lot on hotkeys. So like the folder view, navigating manually with my mouse to try to find things is like, I only do that when I'm like really struggling to remember and find something. But otherwise, I'm usually just like open up a file and then I'm just kind of like tabbing between the tabs, and that's how I think about navigating. And like I don't need the visual reminder of where things sit necessarily in the folder, but I say that to some degree. But I think that's so. Yeah, I get that whole like opening closing. It's an interesting thought there. But I think it's just more of like left to right to me is just like the thing is over here, and then I open it and it shows up over here, and that just seems intuitive for how my brain and maybe in our culture, how we learn how things are organized. I don't know how that is in other parts of the world where writing is different, and maybe directions are a little differently organized.
That's true. That's a good point.
I hadn't actually thought about that one, like the context of someone who would prefer the right versus if they read and write to left anyway. So interesting. What about something highly important like nested ternaries? What do you think about those?
What the hell is a nested ternary?
It's a ternary within a ternary within a ternary, potentially.
No comment.
Would you ever do that?
I'm Googling nested ternary and wondering if I'm just not a savvy enough programmer here to even...
So you're saying I should join the Rails community? I mean, me either. Yeah. Okay, perfect. I'm in. I have no problem with Rails.
Yeah, it's not super important.
I didn't go to like a proper education when it comes to software programming or anything. I'm a high school dropout, and so when it comes to like, I know how to do like, so we're talking like nested conditionals versus using like case statement type situations, or
exactly
kind of
basically kind of
so, ternary is just like where you do the question mark and the colon instead of an if else. So it's like a shorthand for an if else.
Yeah.
But then you nest that shit really deep and it gets really gross looking.
No. I don't. Nesting that stuff is, if it's too hard to read and follow for someone, like that's the whole point of software, is the code. Otherwise, we'd just be writing the lowest level, you know? So it's just like, how simple can we make this for other people to come in and understand what the hell's going on? So as expressive as we can be. And if you need a lot of documentation or comments in your code to explain what's happening, then I would say I would lean unless there's some like performance thing that you're maybe going to gain at it, and there's like a very explicit reason for doing that, 99% of the time I'd be like, let's just, how stupidly simple can you make this to your future self or to some other person that's going to come and look at this project? Because someone else is going to potentially inherit this project from you. And as the person that often ends up inheriting a lot of projects, I can tell you that I would just prefer people just to be verbose, not to the sense where it's like or unnecessarily verbose, but at least verbose enough that I can get an understanding like, why is this here? What is it doing? And how do I make changes to it? And then when you end up getting too clever, then it makes it harder for you to know how to change it. So that's when you start adding band-aids and weird patches and circumventing things, and rather than probably should just refactor that whole thing anyways when it comes to understand it.
You're just
usually not worth
being
it.
considerate to the next person who might look at your work.
Yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, I remember like there was, I think if you did loops backwards in JavaScript, it was like a little bit faster.
Oh,
so like I would occasionally see people do that, where like instead of doing like, you know, I0, I++, you do like, you start at the highest number and you decrement I, is like somehow faster. I don't understand why. But like, I'm like, no, just do it the way that's easy to read. Like the performance gains you're getting are so negligible. Just do it like the way people can follow it. But anyway.
That's interesting. I wonder if there's something about like if you're iterating through like a collection of something, as it gets smaller, does it just be quicker to know how many are left in it? Or I don't understand how this stuff works on that.
Maybe. Yeah, I have no idea.
Retaining the same one over and over and over and just getting to the next thing in it, or can you anyway? Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yes, I do want to circle back to Rails a bit. So Rails is like, I feel like back in the spotlight these days. Like, you know, you always take whatever DHH says with a grain of salt, but he said something like, in like, I guess this year or next year, I forget which year he said, but like, you know, Rails, what's the new one? 8 that's coming out, is like, he's like, it's going to be the best way to write web applications. And like, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I feel like he's maybe not wrong. Like, we're kind of regressing back to all of like old is new again, and like, you know, all these things that weren't sexy for so long is like, well, actually it's been working forever and it works better than ever now, so why not use it?
I think we're reassessing the web platform, and people have forgotten about it, and you know, remember all the things that kind of forced us in some other directions. And they, you know, now they're committed to React. Now they're committed to whatever their tool chain is. And so they just keep trying to improve that versus come back to the core. Let's look, what are the native APIs? What's the web platform look like now? And how, you know, can we actually just leverage that as much as possible instead? I mean, that's what it feels like to me.
Having been part of the Ruby and Rails community for what's over 19 years or something. It's wild to say out loud. It's so funny because like early on in the days, it was always an argument about like Rails is too new. You can't use this you can't use this for real applications, and we should be using Java. And I think Java was not even like 5-10 years old at the time when I was having those arguments with people. And now 20 years later, here we are defending why it's still useful and relevant. But I think there's a couple things I think that have happened. One, I think teams, especially in the last few years, are needing to do more with less people, and so I think there's that part of it. And that's, I think that Ruby on Rails was always really, I think when it came out and it landed, I'm saying the air quoting the market, but the market of software options and frameworks for building web applications, it removed a lot of other roles, maybe running like roles that were a lot of companies used to rely on, like. You thought differently about, do we need a DBA on our projects? Do we need, you know, someone that manages just thinking about like all of the business logic would be tied up in your database, and like the idea and that was a hard thing for me when I came to Rails, was like trusting that the active record layer was going to be a good protector of the data and manage the state of our database really well. Because prior to that, it was a lot of every app I ever worked on, every other programming language was a little bit different, and it was like, what was the flavor of that point in time? And so Rails has provided a really good set of conventions, like, hey, if you stick within these parameters, we make a lot of decisions for you. you can build web apps. You can focus on building things and shipping things quicker. And I think that was really exciting at the time. It was like less. It was kind of like a going away from the like, let's see how geeky we can be as software developers. Look how clever we were. It ended up being more like, let's just build stuff and ship stuff, and let's see if this stuff works and we can make a business out of this, versus like these other, kind of experimental things that we're doing, or needing a much larger team of people in specialized roles. So Rails was early on like kind of like a one-person framework from the beginning, and then I know that DHH is using that in how he talks about it now as well. But it's true, like you can do a lot as with a really small team, and a lot of companies have grown their organizations and grown lots of teams, and so there's definitely some aspects as any type of software platform, as your teams grow, it becomes more complicated to try to like all share the same code base. And so I can understand why companies like a lot of experience, well, let's split off and do a lot of microservices. Let's split off the front end stuff. We can use this new stuff. There's a lot of, and the JavaScript frameworks have always been coming and going over the years. And so trying to find ways how to make that all work together. And Rails kind of in a weird way became like, a really good option for like the API would be. So there's a lot of companies that use Ruby on Rails as the backend API, and you can just throw any front end, and at some point you're going to rewrite the front end on a new platform. And that's happened sometimes. I feel like that idea has probably happened less in reality than I think a lot of people told themselves they were going to do that, because we see a lot of teams that will do that. They'll split up, the back end and the head, and they're like, well, we're going to have multiple front end applications at some point. And so they have different teams or people that are maybe cross developing across both those platforms, but they can be like, well, let's use the best tool for the front end and we'll use Rails in the back end. And then a couple years later, their team's smaller all of a sudden because they had layoffs, or they just don't need that many people anymore. And now they're responsible for many code bases in parallel. And every change requires going into two different applications and trying to get that all in sync. And it's like, it's a lot of work because you're not necessarily set up to have like atomic commits, and your deployments are all separated. And so I feel like there's an interesting thing there around having the platform. So I think people are reevaluating now, like, whoa, maybe it was interesting. We needed a lot of other different types of skill sets and things like that. As and I've always thought that was a natural split, the front and the back end, because speaking to my earlier comments that like I didn't want to think about all the web browser related stuff. Like there's other people who can think about that, and let me focus on the business logic side of things. But I think as like with Rails 8 coming out, and like there's a lot of people, maybe if you're starting a new application, is it a good idea to spin up multiple repos with different technology stacks in parallel and be like, let's build a new app, a new platform now, when I think Rails is putting a compelling argument to be like, hey, we can do this all in Rails. You can split off when you need to at some point, but like, let's see how far you can get with just one application for all your different use cases and stuff like that. So
what I like about that ideology is that I think that resourcing is a big different way to think about that, right? So we've gone through now like a wave of era that is very VC driven, where ideas will get you lots of money to get started, which means get you multiple people to build, which means you can have a greater separation of concerns, right? And there's been a massive pullback in that. And now you have to think about resource-wise. I have this idea. I can't even begin to raise money until I have users and show revenue. I mean, that's starting to happen a whole bunch. And I can't do any of that stuff as a single contributor. What's my accelerant now? Now I start to look at like what is in, what in software accelerates me. I no longer now want to think about like auth, either implementing someone else's or rolling my own. I don't want to think about ORMs. I don't want to think about, all of that kind of like, oh, it's cool. There's whole companies about this and you can get it as a service, but you still have to do work to get it into your application. And then you have to spend money and all of these things. These full stack web application frameworks, the Rails, the Django's, that kind of stuff, that now becomes really relevant and part of the conversation, isn't because you need all this to get out of the gate, right?
And not needing to think about, it's interesting thinking about how they're with the next version of Rails, that there's a lot of emphasis on thinking about like, here's some we're going to include now like some guidance on how to deploy the thing. Whether or not you agree that that's the best approach, but like we can, you can just like, let's just simplify that part of the process, because, if you're again, go back to, I worked in the consulting side of things. We come in a lot of different scenarios where there might be teams that at one point had 25, 30 engineers on their team, and now they have 5. And they're like, we have all this stuff. The deployment process is like, we have all this Terraform stuff that some other guy wrote a couple years ago. We know how to make some changes to it, but we're afraid of breaking it. And they're just like, we don't know what's running on our AWS account. They're afraid to turn stuff off. And so it's just like, it was like cheap to spin things up. And now there's kind of like maybe we could start a little smaller again, and like, but also maybe we shouldn't be individually SSHing into servers and running like apt-get updates and upgrade ourselves. And like, maybe there's some ways we can streamline that a little bit now. And like, the fact that Rails is like going to start including that stuff is kind of exciting for new projects. It's also like, again, because I tend to work on older apps, it's kind of like a little out of reach. I'm like, oh, that's great. But it's also kind of reminding me, I'm like, maybe we can unpack and undo some of this stuff for some of our clients that they've invested in, and be like, hey, when you were making those decisions, you thought your team was going to keep exponentially growing to some degree. Maybe not exponentially, but like, like, hey, we're a team of 5 and we're like going to be adding 5 more people. We'll be 10. And maybe in a couple more years, we'll be 20, 30 people. How do we how are we making technical choices that supports a team of that size? I've very rarely ever heard a team be realistic, be like, what happens when our team is actually going to be smaller?
Yeah.
Nobody thinks about getting smaller as like an ideal thing, but software eventually will... either it gets the power cord gets plugged at some point, but it's probably not when there's 50 people on the team anymore. It's probably a few people left working on it. And so at that point, and not that you should be making decisions, be like planning on only having like the 1 or 2 people left on your project still keeping it running and stuff like that. But if it's too complicated for a few people to understand the whole, then it might be good to come back to those kind of first principles and just like, what are we doing here? How do we make this simpler? Do we need this much complexity? And the complexity we needed to support growing is maybe not what we need now. And how do we unpack that? And then a lot of teams that are smaller now, they don't feel like they have the resources or time to do that. And so those organizations are kind of in a shitty situation. And so, which is why they need maybe companies like mine to come in and maybe help them navigate some of those things. But
yeah,
it's tricky, but I think it's good to question why you're making those decisions and see if you can still support it, and know you're probably going to change your mind in a few years too. So how do you add something, and how can you remove it or swap it out? And so it's tricky.
The bus factor is pretty bad there. If you're growing and you're very dependent on A and B person potentially, and then A and B go away, what happens? There's a big bit of that. Although it's funny that a lot of the things you said are very like counterproductive to probably what a bunch of your business is fueled by. Is you
that's true.
Tell
you want
them
people to do
the problems. You want people to do the wrong thing. I mean, you don't want to. They just do it anyway, right? Like you say, all right, here I am. For us not to see each other again in a couple of years, this is what you should do. And then inevitably.
I mean, maybe a mission is to put myself out of a job. But, and that'll be my legacy, is that like there was no more of these problems aren't going to go away. They need to be talked about. And just in the same way, like if all coaches could coach their athletes to be the best, highest performing people, great. But there's a reason why they're still coaches, and there's a reason why they're still therapists. People learn a little bit. Some people retain that information and can iterate on that. And some of them don't, and some of them forget, and they need reminding, and that's okay too. Listen to my podcast and maybe a book one day.
Oh, there you go. Listen to his podcast. I agree.
Speaking of which, do you have any tips or tricks or like things for people who may want to start a podcast, or like, from equipment to like,
or improve their podcast, or like upgrade their co-hosts, or just hypothetically.
Yeah. I do like the idea of like starting your podcast off with whiskey as a good business expense. So that's wise. I think finding something that you're excited and passionate about, or at least enjoy consuming, when I started my podcast, I think I knew about 2 years before I did my first interview what I wanted to do. And my goal was to capture conversations with people to talk about what I believe is a topic that we don't often talk about, which is how complicated it is to take care of existing code and legacy code. And like a large part of our job is coming into existing situations, working on them. We're rarely ever getting to be the person that spins up a brand new application. Most developers don't get to do that all that often outside of their own little personal hobby projects. If a company is hiring you, they probably already have some code and they need you to jump in and wrap your head around it. And I think I've often wondered that we've done a disservice in our thinking about how we educate and shine a light on like, hey, is this a good industry to join as a career? Because if you're going to get to be a creator, you're going to get to make things, you're building all these new things all the time. And I think I've seen a lot of people come into the industry and they go through like a coding boot camp and they learn how to build some stuff. They work on some bug fixes for things. They do their internships at companies like mine. They get their first job and they're like, all I do is fix bugs and like make small little updates. And they're like, I thought I was going to be building new features all the time. And I'm like, that's part of some people's jobs sometimes, but a lot of the project work is maintenance work and taking care of things. And you kind of learn through that over a period of time. So I wanted to have conversations with people, just let people like, that is actually a really big part of the job. And we're often in the role of menders, not makers. And so I wanted to capture conversations that I thought would be relevant, not just now, but also like in a decade or more. So I don't talk a lot about what's new and shiny in technology. I don't talk about hot takes very often. Just recently I had a couple conversations with people about AI and how it can be helpful for that stuff, but not because like what's new and where do you think AI is going to go as an industry. So that was like at least coming up with a premise that I thought was like moderately unique. I feel like there's a lot of interesting podcasts around what's new and happening. And so then you're competing with everybody else that's talking about what's new and happening, which is important stuff to be talking about. Don't get me wrong. People like to talk about that. But I live in a world where I often work in, as I said, projects that are several years old. And I'm like, and a lot of people that are working on projects that are far behind on versions and things like that. And they're just like, well, that sounds great, but I'm never going to be there. We're always going to be way behind. So if I listen to a podcast or go to a conference and hear about what's new in Rails 8, great. Maybe we'll get there in 5 years. Maybe, or they dream that the only way to get to that scenario is to go to job hop to another company where they think the grass is greener, and then they'll get to work on a brand new version of something, and then they learn that that's not always the case either. So, anyway, so as far as that part of it, that was just like figuring out that was my focus for my project, and I also wanted to be not technology stack focused, and so I didn't want to talk with just Ruby and Rails people. I want to talk with people of all different spectrums and hear different stories and have a lot of similar conversations with a lot of wide variety of people. So that was my angle. So in terms of other things about the process, I don't do the editing. I've never done the editing. I knew that I would be a bottleneck, so I immediately found an editor originally on Upwork, and they did 100 and something episodes with us before I had to get my second editor, which I have now. I knew that it needed to be, I can handle the upfront part of the process of finding guests, prepare for the interviews, handle all the communications with the guests up until the interview, have the interview, automate as much of that stuff as I possibly could, and then throw some files into a Dropbox folder for our editor and be like, great. And then someone else would pick up the output of that process, and then they would, organize all the social media assets and publish it on the web, and then schedule that and let the guests know that their episode was published when it was ready. So that was something I knew I needed to do. And so until I had that kind of whole pipeline organized, I didn't want to like release anything. And the other thing I made myself do was like, I'm going to record 10 episodes before I tell anybody publicly that this was a thing. I'm like, I wanted to get ahead.
Very smart.
Yeah. Let me get 10 episodes, and then I could rearrange which episodes I was going to have first. And so like maybe my first one, which I still would think was one of my weakest ones, because I was trying to navigate being an interviewer. And I can kind of rearrange that a little bit based off of how I felt like those first several one went. I didn't want to be, I've become this person that's been hesitant to talk publicly about things until it's ready. I'd rather just like, because I have projects I've worked on in the past where like, hey, I got a book deal, and then like sign up, and then you find out like 6 months later, by the way, I'm not going to finish the book now. I'm sorry I asked for your email address 6 months ago. I don't want to be like vapor announcement stuff. Like people do that all the time, and I'm just like,
oh yeah.
I'm like, no, actually do the thing and be like, hey, cool. So that was another thing. I think if you can hold it back, I feel it's much more exciting to be like, you can actually participate now. You can buy the thing now. You can subscribe now and start listening right now. To me, that feels like a much more exciting thing.
Yeah.
Rather than, I need that as the motivator is like, I know that I can get people to sign up, but I'd rather it actually just be like, this is dropped.
Yeah. There's a lot of podcasts that I've seen they get really hype about doing it. They like make a cool logo. They like record an episode or two and they're done. And it's like, yeah, if you do at least 10, that, builds that muscle memory and that like habit, and you're probably going to keep doing it. And yeah, it lets you know if you hate it, like 8 episodes in, you should just stop and not even release it, because like you're not going to keep going. So yeah, that's really good advice, I think.
You can also then determine if maybe that was a one-time thing. You could just release those 8 to 10 episodes and be like, this was a one-time thing. Here's a capturing, and there's not going to be a season 2. And this was a catalog of some conversations I wanted to share. There's one series, TV shows all the time. That's true. Call it it's a limited series. You could just reframe it. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways you can think about that kind of stuff. But I think if you try to do one at a time and release as you go, then it's really easy to fall off the wagon and not keep up. You haven't built up the consistency of it. And the other thing I would recommend is, like, when it comes to like finding guests, is I put a lot of energy into trying to find very diverse groups of people to be on the podcast. And now to the point where people ask me often, like, hey, can I be on your podcast? Or I have a recommendation for somebody to be on your podcast, usually like a PR company or something. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about like what's new and shiny, but I now secret hack is when someone reaches out to me, I'm like, I'm open to having you on the podcast, but I need you to give me at least 3 recommendations for other guests that you think would also be good guests on this episode.
I like that.
And so before I will schedule with you, give me that list, and then they'll give me a list, and then follow-up question, do you have any women that you can recommend? And they're like, so that puts some work into that process. I can kind of offload that onto other guests, and they will usually give me good guest recommendations. And then when people say, like, I don't have any women to recommend to you to be on the podcast, then I could be like, well, let me know when you can. And so I think like that tends to be a good way. And then so I have like a pretty large list of like potential guests, and then it's always just a matter of just trying to get them scheduled and my own. I've got a lot of things I'm focused on as well, outside of just having a podcast that's not quite weekly.
I hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of other things you have going on, I do want to talk about, and you said it's Oh My Zsh Shell. I always said Oh My ZSH, but like
I've always said Oh My Zsh Shell.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, have you? You said Z Shell always?
Yeah.
Damn. Okay,
Zsh.
I'm in the minority.
Because Zsh is the because ZSH is like that's the file type thing or whatever. Anyway, Z Shell. Yeah, I've always said this.
I say Z Shell typically. It's
I feel like you have some authority here.
Yeah. Well, I didn't.
You get to decide. Yeah.
Well, Z Shell, if you just go to like the Z Shell website, or I forget somewhere there's a pronunciation for just Z Shell itself, and then for Oh My Zsh Shell, I think it'd be weird for me to pronounce it otherwise.
That's
but if people say Z Shell because that's just how they say Z. In some places, I have a recording on my Twitter profile, and I pronounce it Oh My, and that tends to people. I was just at a conference down in Brazil, and a lot of people brought that up, and they thought it was funny. And I'm like, I don't know why I'm telling you about my own jokes here, but Oh My Zsh
because you had some whiskey. That's why.
That's true. I'm gonna pour a little bit more.
Yeah, do
go
it
for it.
Because it's funny. It kind of makes me think of my dot files. A couple of things that I always set up on my new computer is homebrew and Oh My Zsh Shell. And then I've got my antigen themes and all that kind of fun stuff.
I think Robby is so honored that you use it. You're such an important force, Charles William Carpenter III.
You everything I'm doing that's right in the world is you're a part of it.
Yeah. See, I'm the weird one who uses fish. So
I use fish too. I don't use it. I don't use Zsh Shell.
That would be amazing.
I love it.
Oh, I used to use that like 10 years ago, but now I don't. But anyway, that's right.
I feel like I'd be turning my back. We're coming up. It's interesting. We're coming up on the 15th it was a birthday, anniversary. What do you say for
anniversary?
Like
Yeah.
Anniversary is good.
This summer will be 15 years, and it was feature complete when I first released it, and because all I wanted was my coworkers, when we'd be pairing on their computers, to have the same aliases and shortcuts that I use, because I'm a lazy typer and I couldn't remember everything. I'm like, I just have all these Git commands and all these other things, like 3-4 character things, prior to using, before Oh My Zsh existed in my crazy Zsh configuration. Before that, I used to rely a lot on like things like text expander and things like that. It was always about just speeding up my process to have a bunch of shortcuts for things. And so, but anyways, yeah, it's Oh My Zsh is how I pronounce it. And 15 years. And all I wanted, my success was I convinced them all to install this thing, because they wouldn't just copy my Zsh RC file because they didn't understand what it did. And I was like, well, I don't really understand what it all does either. It was like a copy and paste with a bunch of different friends, and some tweaks that I had made over the years from different other people, primarily from the Ruby on Rails community. Stuff I'd copied off of I don't know if you remember, there used to be a website called Pasty back in the day. And so it was kind of like a GitHub gist type of page where people could throw up like a file of code. So we were always like sharing little recipes on how to improve your Zsh configuration. And I just loved the autocomplete features and some stuff like that in there. And they wouldn't use, most of the people on my team wouldn't just copy my Zsh configuration, even though it was perfect, obviously, because I created it. I'm like, well, if you want me to work on your computer with you and help you do some coding with you, and I'm doing typing, please add this stuff, because it's just tedious to try to remember how to do this, or looking at the man page for the full syntax. But then one weekend I was like, I'm going to document and clean up my Zsh configuration just so that I understand what it does, so I can explain it to them, and then maybe that'll allow them to copy and paste it. And then as I did that, I'm like, oh, I'm going to reorganize it. So I created a directory, and I started organizing stuff into different sections, and then I broke them out into some separate files. And I was like, well, I'll kind of treat this like a little framework of some sort. And it was just a directory with some subfolders and stuff like that. And like a template file, and like the install was basically git clone the thing and then copy this file or copy this thing in your Zsh RC file, and you would use it. And it didn't have plugins, it didn't have themes, anything that people would reference now. None of that existed the first day, because it was literally just all of my configuration. And then like day 2, everybody on my team, I'm air quoting, installed it. And then the next step was the next day, one of my team members, Carlos, said, how do I change the colors? And I said, why? My color choices are perfect. And he's like, oh, I want to add some different characters and change how that looks. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. So I'm like, we'll just edit this file. Like there was like a terminal or prompt file or something that I had in there. So he made changes. And then he wanted to add some new aliases as well. And then so he did, and pushed it to my, was sharing my Git repository with the team. And so everybody was like adding stuff, but there was a problem. He couldn't do a Git pull, because there was now a merge conflict, because he had made changes in his file, in the prompt file. And so I had inflection, or this, what do we do? Carlos has his changes and I have mine. I can either put a conditional, if it's Carlos, do this, or if it's Robby's, do this. And I'm like, that doesn't look good. So we created a concept like, well, I guess this is a theme. So we created a directory called themes, stuck his file in there and stuck mine in there. And then you just added the thing, and it would just load the specific theme. And then a couple of weeks, and then I shared it on my blog, and people started using it, and then started getting contributions. And then someone from like the Python community was like, hey, I don't need all these Rails aliases. I want to have some stuff for Django. And I was like, well, that's stupid. So I was like, all right. And so I moved all my Rails stuff into a Rails file, and I'm like, I guess that's a plugin. And we've got Python plugins or Django plugins, and that's how it all like started. It was just people being like, I don't want all of your stuff, Robby. Even though it was like, oh, my Zsh, my Zsh. It became like everybody thought of it was their Zsh as well, I guess, my Zsh. So it just snowballed, and everybody started, throwing ideas in it, like, oh, I want to do it for this thing, and here's a command line thing, and then, a couple hundred themes and hundreds of plugins later, it's like, how did this? It became an easy project for people to contribute to, but that's the kind of like origin story. I didn't have this master creative plan, like, I'm gonna do this thing that everybody's gonna love. It was like, how do I get everybody on my team to have all those aliases, so when we're pairing, we can all save a few keystrokes and
Scratch your own itch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how has your experience been with like, it sounded like a lot of people just kind of contributed organically, but I feel like it's this big problem with open source that like everyone expects everything. It's like we're entitled for this to work on everything I could possibly use it on. Like I'm going to run this on my microwave and it's using like Bash and not Z shell and like it should all work. Like, how much of that have you gotten, and like, how do you deal with like deciding what should go in and like how all that works?
As far as like the Bash versus, that one's easy enough. It's like, well, it relies on Z shell. So, but people have cloned the concept, and there's like, oh my Bash. There's, I think a lot of stuff in the fish stuff was somewhat inspired by oh my Z shell as well. And like there's oh my Posh for like Windows people. So there's similar variants of it that have kind of spawned. But as far as the project itself, a couple of complex parts or periods of time where I was having a lot of people contribute, and we were like working on things that we thought about the plugin system in particular. Like, well, if everything is includes, one of the biggest complaints we've always had is like, oh, it's, I'm going to air quote, bloated. It's like a bunch of text files. So if it's taking up too much space on your computer, maybe get a bigger hard drive, but that's fine. It's not that crazy. It's not, and you're only loading what you need. But there was some conversations around how are we going to make this project, or how do we think about plugins? And so we thought about this, like building some more complicated plugin system that would require, and one idea that got proposed, and this was many years ago, was to use Git submodules for that. Ooh. And as we navigated and we're going through and testing things out, I was like, you know what? This seems so complicated for someone new to a terminal environment. Like they're just learning Git in general. Like even whether they can even answer the question of Git merge versus Git rebase, like let alone like you do a Git clone, they can do some really basic things, but to start thinking about submodule management, when that always felt a little awkward. Yeah. I was like, I think that might be a no for me. Like I had to take it wasn't until we got far enough along down that path, and as I was testing this out and with a couple people, I'm like, I just think this is going to be too hard and it's going to be a barrier for entry. So it was at that point where I was like, I guess I need to kind of define my target user is going to be someone that's new, like a junior developer coming into this environment. Like from step one, they install this thing and immediately they are like, ooh, my environment just changed. I feel like I just made a big change, and all I did was run some command line thing, and I can start making some tweaks and pick a theme out, and I start using some aliases, and I feel like a power user all of a sudden. Let's cater to them. And when people can outgrow it and are advanced and can figure out they don't need it anymore, great. I assume most people would outgrow Oh My Zsh and do their own thing or find some other thing or just take what they need. But then I hear from those people like, oh, the default's great. I don't need it. I see my theme show up in people's slides, and I don't know how many different demo videos I see for different products out there that are CLI related things, and they're showing stuff, and I'm like, that's my theme. It's just everywhere. And I'm like,
yeah.
You could use other themes. Cool.
But please use other themes is what you're saying now, huh?
When it comes down to it, it's like, how easy is this going to be for new people to be onboarded to this and thinking about that is my target user now, and it has been for many years. And like, let's let everybody feel like a super user day one, and then like, cool, I'm a hacker, and then, and I can sell stickers and t-shirts to those people, and that's fun. So
yeah, I think that's part of the key that like a lot of people don't think about, myself included, really, is like, you're just building a thing to build it, but you're not thinking about who is your user. And having that like user persona really helps you decide like what goes in and what doesn't, because you're like, well, this doesn't benefit the user I'm trying to serve, so it's not going in. And like, I have that problem of like, I want to make everyone happy, so everything goes in, like, but then that's too complex, and yeah, it doesn't serve everyone. So that's a good thing, is like figure out who your user is and like try to cater to them.
That's strange. I've not had that experience with you. So anyway,
sense some sarcasm there.
Yeah. There's a touch of that, which like takes us into lighter notes, I would say.
Yeah. Speaking of, what are you curious about?
Robby Russell, I'm very curious. If you weren't in tech, what other career would you choose?
I quit my last job officially 20 years ago this month. to do Planet Argon full time because I thought that I was going to be able to figure out how to be a starving musician. So playing music has and is one of my favorite things to do. I love collaborating with other people. It's also, I still very much involved in it now and have a band, and we're finishing up our 4th album right now. Got to go on a short tour last summer, which was
Is it grunge?
Exciting.
I gotta ask.
No, it's not. We are a instrumental post-rock art band. So if you Explosions in the Sky, Mogwai.
Oh yeah. I love Mogwai. I love Mogwai.
Yeah. So Mogwai is one of my favorite bands, and that's a creative outlet that I've had for a long time. And so that would be one thing. I used to think that I wanted to be a baker. What I knew I didn't want to do when I was a teenager was work in tech, or specifically at the time I called it the computer industry, because I grew up in the Silicon Valley. My dad worked in hardware. He just recently retired. He used to work at like hard drive manufacturing and networking companies and test engineer on real hardware, and was always like, you should be a software programmer, since I was a little kid. And I was like, this is boring. I'm gonna go outside and play with my friends. Because I love playing with computers, and I've always used computers and loved doing things with them, but it was never the thing that drew me. The approach to like learning how to program when it was introduced to me by my father was like him getting me a book when I was like 6, and like, if you type all this stuff on all these pages in this editor thing and you can run it, then you can play this game. And I was like, but isn't the game already made? Can I just play the game? Why do I'm like just typing everything? What I think was missing from the educational experience was, and then we'll modify it, and then we'll make it, we'll personalize it, we'll make changes to it. Like, that part wasn't really like, we didn't really talk about that. Like, let's build a thing to track my little league stats for my team. Like, that would have been an interesting thing for me to solve. So I've never been interested in the tech itself just for the sake of doing it. It was always like, what can I do with it? And so the reason I even like learned to start really getting to do any web development in the mid late 90s is because I wanted to sell stickers, and I had a mail order catalog thing that I was doing for like in the punk music scene, and I wanted to do stuff on the web. And so I learned how to do some web stuff so people can submit a form online. So I'm like, how do I do that? I can't afford to pay someone. I'm like 17, 18-year-old kid. I'll just figure out how to like have a web page that saves to like a text file or something on a server, and I can FTP and see that nobody ordered my stickers. So like, that's how I learned to start doing web stuff, and I pick up those skills over several years, and 25, 30 years later, and I now, because of some software I wrote, I sell stickers and t-shirts almost daily to people because they want to support the project, which is kind of funny. So I guess the other career, the career I wish I either would love to be a musician or just like a DIY like sticker salesperson on the internet would have been exciting for me. Selling stickers for a couple $1 a pop.
Yeah, this sounds like a Robby dream.
Yeah, I would love to like be a screen printer and sell shirts, but like, or also music, a lot of stuff there. I was in bands for years, and then just like, it doesn't pay any money, so you can't do that. But like,
it's an expensive hobby. If you are listening and you like the bands that you listen to and you only stream them, feel free to pop over to their Bandcamp site from time to time and buy the digital versions of it, give them some money, or maybe they'll even send you some vinyl or CDs or cassette tape in the mail.
Cassettes are cool again, so
they are.
Yeah.
I don't have a cassette player.
I don't have anything to play it either. Yeah, vinyl
I had a bunch
is like
of those for a little while.
I feel like vinyl's cool again, and like most people agree with that. But like Gen Z is like, cassettes are cool again, and I'm like, are they though? Like, I'm not sure.
Funny.
But
I had a car from 2000 for a little bit I bought it 6 years ago, and I had it for 4 years, something like that. And it had a cassette player. For the first 2 years, I really leaned in. Had a cassette player. I was like, I'm going to get cassettes. You can buy them super cheap on eBay, go to the flea market, whatever else. And I kind of leaned into that for a bit. So I didn't know they were cool now. They are inconvenient.
I think they're cool, like in a weird way. Like they're not actually cool. I think we can all of us agree that like vinyl is cool because you can like, you don't have to rewind it. You can just like start it over. Like tapes were inconvenient because it's like.
Have you ever played an 8-track?
No, I have not. I've never had an 8-track.
Because 8-tracks are like cassettes that you can't rewind. You literally have the separate tracks for the songs, and you're clicking through, and wherever you left off last, that's where you go back to the song.
I didn't remember that part of that. I only ever played with 8-tracks on my grandfather's basement when he was a truck driver, and I remember not the same grandfather that was the third, my other side.
Not
of my
Robert
family,
Russell.
who also worked in tech. He worked at Atari in the early era.
That's cool.
Of Atari. He was, so that was an interesting thing to learn about him. When I was
I actually never played with Ataris. I had Intellivision, but never Atari.
Oh.
Yeah.
I had Atari 2600 and an Atari computer. That was the first time I ever did any programming. I don't know what it was, but I know my grandfather on my mother's side, he was a programmer for Procter & Gamble. We were in like northern Kentucky, Cincinnati area. So my grandfather there did work in computers, but it was like I didn't know him that well, and he gave me this notepad of things to type in. I thought that was cool, and then I forgot about it for 20 years. And then my dad was a welder, like blue collar kind of whatever, but he had 8 tracks. I don't know where I was going with this, but anyway, that's
I remember
that
finding
8-track reference
in
goes.
my grandfather's 8-track collection, there was like adult themed 8-tracks apparently that people would listen to while they're on the road. So if I didn't, that was an experience that I was not expecting to retain all of my years. I should call him. He's still around. He lives in Tennessee. I should I've never asked him about that. I'm like, hey, I once came across some very interesting 8-tracks in your basement. That, you were a truck driver.
Well, those were in a closet you weren't supposed to get into. That's the thing there.
Maybe.
Yeah, the things I found in the closet in the basement were different.
Yeah. Stack of vintage Playboys.
Yeah, vintage, some even modern, possibly. Anyway, well, you're not just half Luton, Robbie. You got some Tennessee blood in you.
I do.
Well, both of us. I didn't know who you were talking to there because my mom's whole family is from Tennessee.
Oh, really? Whereabouts?
Kingsport, mostly.
I don't know where that is.
Big Eastman plant down there. Like they, I don't know what they even make. It smells like crap everywhere because whatever they're making is smelly.
Like literal crap?
No, like weird chemicals. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, Kingsport and some in Knoxville, but not originally from Knoxville.
I know a lot of people in Knoxville.
Yeah.
I just remember Lynchburg was like the town over, and so because that was a dry town and dry county, and my great grandfather had like farmland in Tullahoma, which was like next to there, and I guess that's over near. What's the name of that music festival they have out that way? It's like the big one.
I don't know.
I'm too old.
I do know that I think Kingsport was also a dry county because like my mom has told me about my grandma would like cross county lines to buy like bourbon to make like a bourbon cake or something and be like worried like she's driving home like
That's funny. Lynchburg is where Jack Daniels is.
Yeah.
Their distillery.
A hard place to get a drink
irony.
is what they call their tagline, right? Something
Yeah,
like
because
that.
you can't do tastings there and stuff. So it's
No, I went there once when I was a kid, and what they would let you do is they would lift up like the top of like some crates or something, and the smell would hit you.
Oh,
And so I don't know. That was like as close to like drinking as you could do there. And then, but it's also being there. It was like there, and what's the other sour mash whiskey there? Oh, Dickel. And it was like from that area as well. That was my early entry into whiskey and whatnot.
oh, interesting. So you started from the Tennessee side, not just this weird Scotch shit.
No,
Proper Scotch whiskey, right?
always,
Or a bit of Scotch.
but always, yeah, it would always be like Jack mixed with some soda or something, and I don't.
Yeah.
think
Yeah, that's the classic. Yeah.
Yeah, I did college. What college I did was always Jim Beam and Coke.
We were
It's
Evan
cheaper,
Williams and
but still
Dickel
nicer.
because it was a little cheaper.
Dickel was cheaper. Interesting. I think Dickel's
Well,
actually
Evan Williams
pretty
definitely
decent.
was cheaper. I don't know if Dickel was cheaper.
They're low tier. I still feel all of that is fancier than.
Then what?
I'm trying to think. Popov was the plastic. Anything in plastic.
Does
bottles.
Popov make whiskey?
No, but Popov
The
is the
Popov vodka is like
so. What is the
free?
whiskey
They pay you
equivalent?
to take it. Yeah.
No, they don't. They don't. But you are able to pull enough out of like a couch cushion to get it.
Yeah, that's true. But then the next day, everyone is dead.
Yeah.
It's like full of like everything you're not supposed to put in there is like all they put in there.
For sure. Is that even legal anymore? Probably.
Yeah.
I always keep a nostalgic thing. I always have a bottle of rye Dickel in our whiskey cabinet. So
I think it's decent. Yeah, I've got no qualms with Dickel.
They actually do a lot of cool collaborations. I'm forgetting with who right now, but I've seen a lot of them. So like they're not bad.
is that also in a dry county? Do you know? I've not. I might go back and visit my grandparents who are still around and living out that way. So I'm like realizing I know they can't do tastings all the places, but anyway, I'll report back.
Let us know. The only Tennessee one I know, just because we've been to the Greenbrier distillery, which is where Belle Meade was like their first big one, which was like sourced and whatever else. But now they have their own distillate out, and Greenbrier and something else are the two labels. Actually pretty decent.
It's like Nelson. Is it Nelson Brothers?
Nelson Brothers. That's right. Yeah, very good. See, you have not had enough whiskey.
Yeah, their story was cool because they were like, they went to the county where it started or whatever, and the like historical society had like 2 original bottles and like the like mash bill of how to make them. And they were like, "Oh my God, thank God we found you. Like, we want to give these to you so you can start this back up." And they were like, "Yeah, we do. Like, we're going to start that right now." Like,
the family was like, we're trying to figure this out. They got that. Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah, I wish someone would do that for me, but they haven't, so.
I was going to say, George Dickel is a brand of Tennessee whiskey produced in Tullahoma and Coffee County. I feel like they should rename the county. I don't remember that for the coffee. Yeah.
Well, Bourbon County in Kentucky, the borders of that have changed, and most of the distilleries aren't in Bourbon County anymore. Anyway,
is that going through a whole thing where like if it's not from Bourbon County, it can't be called bourbon? Like a champagne
no, that's
thing,
not true. No, that's not true.
Bourbon is just American.
U.S. Yeah, it does have to be a U.S. spirit because it's federally mandated and there's like rules there. But you can make it in Colorado or Kentucky and it's still bourbon. Yeah, as long as you follow the rules, it comes out of the U.S. So it's not quite like, well, it's more like Scotch because Scotch has to come from Scotland.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's Japanese whiskey, basically.
Yeah.
Or just single malt American.
I like Scotch better than Japanese, but
do you really? Thus far, I
Japanese has no flavor. It's like water. I don't love it. Like I respect
Yamazaki
that they can
18.
make of like 90 or not 90%, 90 proof thing taste like water, but also I want some flavor. I just want flavor.
Okay. Yamazaki 18. We got to try that together because I've had it. I thought it was pretty good. I think it was like 2014, 2015's like it was the first Japanese whiskey to get rated #1 whiskey in the world at that time. And it was pretty good. And then all the prices got inflated.
Yeah. We are over time here. Is there anything you want to plug or mention before we end?
So many things. Let me pull up my list here. My scroll. All right. Robby Russell will be speaking at I
thought it was going to be your album. That would have been.
Actually, you know what? If you head to my band is called the Mighty Missoula, and it's named after the famous, like I forget how many thousands of years ago, floods that would. So there used to be this ancient glacier lake. Getting into geology nerd thing, somewhere in like the Montana, Idaho region in the United States, there used to be this huge glacial lake there, and it would flood every so often, and it would flood the whole Pacific Northwest. Like it was so massive that it carved out a lot of the Pacific Northwest in the landscape, and so it would go all the way from like that area. It would flood, like I don't know if you're familiar with Oregon, but like the Willamette Valley, like where I live, like that's how far.
That's where the good Pinot Noirs are.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so it's called the Missoula floods. Is what that's called. So we're named ourselves after that, which is a reference back to another post-rock bands. They have a song called the Mighty Rio Grande, and we named ourselves kind of. That's what we do. It's as musicians, we name ourselves. Like naming things is always kind of like a derivative of something else. So, anyways, the Mighty Missoula, we have our 4th album coming out later this year. We are finishing up mixing that, and so if you look for the Mighty Missoula, maybe have those in the show notes. But otherwise, my company's Planet Argon. Oh My Zsh is Oh My Zsh on the internet. I'm Robby with a Y, not IE, and I'm the 3rd. But I don't usually say that online. And there's a really good episode on the Maintainable podcast where I interviewed someone named Robby Wagner, Robby the Wagner recently, which was recently published. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Robby.
Oh, you left me out of that. Oh, fuck you guys.
Because you weren't named Robby.
I'm out.
You were the third, though. Yeah.
I don't know how to interview two people at the same time. But after doing this, I'm like, maybe it's not so hard.
Who knows?
Yeah, it's less structured for sure.
Fair enough.
Well, I guess you're doing two hosts.
Yeah.
I need to figure. I get approached about this sometimes, and I'm like, I don't know that I know how to do that yet.
We make it up.
Yeah.
Fun fact: we make it up.
That's great.
We don't know how to do anything.
So if you're a user of Oh My Zsh shop, we sell stickers on the internet, and that always tickles me when I see stickers on people's laptops or come say hi to me at an upcoming conference.
I will send you one on this cup.
Ooh, sounds great.
Yeah, Syntax podcast.
Nice.
Like ours, but less whiskey and probably better.
And more facts. Yeah. All right.
Thank you both. Thank you both for having me on. It's been a delightful conversation, and enjoy the whiskey.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Glad you enjoyed it.
Indeed.
Thanks everyone for listening. If you liked it, please subscribe, leave us some ratings and reviews. We appreciate it, and we will catch you next time.